Hi, everybody, and welcome back to Live Beyond Sunday. Today, we are going to be talking about why the space exists. So, welcome, Alissa.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited.
Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Gosh, what is there to know? There's a lot. I am newly married, only 4 months now, and I am 3 months pregnant. So we did not waste time on that. I'm a mom. I have two teenage daughters and two bonus kids. I'm a speaker. I travel the nation preaching and doing worship, and I'm an author, and I actually record music as well. So I wear a lot of hats. But God is good and life is full. So
Yes, you do. You do a lot. And so, I met you, about 2, 3 years ago? I think it's been.
3 years ago. Yeah.
Yeah, so crazy. So, yeah, Alyssa is someone that she's one of those people you just automatically attach to. She's amazing, just really down to earth. And like she said, she wears a lot of hats. So I am grateful that you're in my life and we've just developed this very sweet friendship. So I can't wait to meet your new husband and to just meet your new baby and, see your girls. So super excited for things to come. So let's get into today's topic. So, like I said, we're talking about why the space exists. And so, specifically, about why faith has to go beyond Sunday and into how we actually live. So, I think a lot of people believe it's not necessary to live it out. So, what's kind of your take on like how we live out our faith day to day and not just have the shallow faith on Sundays?
Well, I think that goes into the difference between religion and relationship. Because if this is just a Sunday morning lifestyle, then it's just tradition. It's literally just tradition, routine. You do this because mama took you and grandmama took you, and this is just what we do. I always like to tell people I'm not religious, I'm relational. And, that sounds cliche, but relationship is with someone you're wanting to spend time with. You want to get to know them. You want to sit down with them. You want to break bread with them. An acquaintance is someone you might see once a week. And a lot of
Yeah.
people treat Jesus as that, an acquaintance. And that is Sunday living right there. You're just in acquaintanceship with God. But a relationship is someone you live life with. You may not see them every day, but you do your best to talk to them and be with them more than just that one meeting point a week. And especially when we go into covenant, because our relationship with the Lord is a picture of covenant. And, when you look at marriage, you can't just meet up with your spouse once a week and think that it's a good marriage.
Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
think what it boils down to is relationship. And what this is really trying to the end goal is this is a covenant thing. This is not just an acquaintanceship that I'm trying to accomplish here. So
Right. No, that's good. And it reminds me of Isaiah 29:13. And so what's happening here is God's addressing the religious leaders. And that scripture specifically says, these people come near me with their mouth and honor me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. And I think that you kind of touched on that. Like, it's a relationship. You can have the outward motions and do all the right things and be church without having that relationship with God. And so, where do you see the biggest disconnect or the biggest challenge in this area that people just kind of don't put it together?
I think one, this is a whole can of worms we can open up here, but I feel like the church is really bad at doing life with people. We are really good at wanting them to come to our Sunday services to fill a seat and to make an attendance number, but we don't check in with people. We don't try to create spaces to do life with them outside of a Sunday service. And because of that, we have new Christians that may not know how to do an everyday walk in relationship with the Lord, and we're expecting them to just figure it out on their own. Whereas Jesus did life with his disciples, and that's how they knew how to have relationship, because they did life with him. We can't expect people to know how to walk out everyday faith if we're not walking out everyday life with them. They're not going to learn how to do everyday faith if we're just doing life with them on a Sunday morning service 2 hours a week. And they've got all these other hours in the week to fill, and we're expecting them to figure it out. And so I think the disconnect is being family and kingdom minded and actually truly loving people. Like loving people, not our service. And I think we love our service more than we love our community. And and then we want to get upset at them when they don't know how to actually walk out the word because we're not taking them hand by hand and really doing the kingdom work together.
So, what are some ways that you've seen that in the church? Because I think you nailed it. Being a pastor's daughter, I've seen this. I've lived it. And so what other areas do you think that kind of creeps up where it looks like people are growing, but really they have the stagnant, like, faith that's not propelling them into where God may want to take them?
I think that it boils down to we are so busy being human doings that we're not being human beings. Doing. So it looks like you're growing. But in the doing, you're not ever being with God. Like you're showing up and going to choir practice and you're serving at youth and you're greeting people on a Sunday morning and you're at all the events and you're, handing food out to the needy. But in all of that doing, when did you ever be with God? You're never sitting down and opening your Bible. You're never sitting down and studying. You're never sitting down and praying. You're not taking time to fast. You're not taking time to just be with Him. But it looks like you're growing because you're so involved doing. And, that can look good to the natural eye, but that's not where true growth is. That's where the overflow of being with God should come from. That's not the initial foundation. And if you don't make the initial foundation being with God, then all the overflow of doing is going to burn you out.
No, that's so good because I'm glad you said that. That's a perfect segue because it's a lot of people think that faith is just simply belief, but faith, like scripture defines it differently, right? So like in Hebrews 11:1, it says, now faith is the confidence in what we hope for and the assurance about what we don't see. And then we also see James 2:14 through 17, faith by itself, if it's not accompanied by action is dead. So there are works, but your works are not what, gives us salvation. It's not, our faith, it is the fruit of that. It is the work of that, but it is not the thing that says, hey, like I'm a believer and I'm walking this thing out day to day. So if faith, belief and alone isn't enough, then why do people stop at belief and they don't move it into action? Like, what is that disconnect there? And how do we move from just simple belief and saying, I believe that God is who He says He is, to faith in action?
That's something that I think the church people really struggle with because I think it's easier to say, God, I believe if it's your will, you'll do it. It's easier to put it on God. If you're a healer, you'll do it. If you're a deliverer, you'll do it. If you're a provider, you'll do it. If you're the one that restores my joy, and so that puts you in a stance of, I believe, but I'm going to sit and wait. When you look at a waitress at a restaurant, they're waiting on you, but they're serving.
I love
Waitresses,
that.
they're serving. And so you wait on the Lord in the aspect of I trust you, but while I'm waiting, I'm serving. I've got to do something. I've got to put work into this. It's a partnership, and it goes back to the very beginning in Genesis where the Lord commanded Adam and Eve to take dominion over the earth, be fruitful, multiply. You're the one in control. You've got to do work. We've been commanded from the beginning, this is all yours, but it's going to require work. And in the word, He says, this is all yours, but faith without works is dead. So we're not sitting and waiting on God to do all the work because, once again, we're coming back to this is a covenant thing, not an acquaintanceship thing. If I'm in a marriage, I can't expect my husband to do all the work while I sit around and want to be served. I have to
Yeah.
serve him as well. And in a partnership, we can't just sit and believe that God's going to take care of us while we sit and do nothing to partner with him, serving his kingdom, and doing something. The highest form of faith is acting like what God said is true. And so if you're going to act like what God said is true, you're not sitting down on it, you're moving towards it. And so you can't say you're in faith if you're still sitting. It requires action. Faith is a verb. It's a verb. It takes action. And so, I think it goes back to that mindset of partnership. And once again, we're in a covenant with the Lord. It's not one sided or it does not work. So,
Yeah. No, I love that. I remember there was a season where I used to believe that work was a result of sin coming into this world. And when I went back and I read that we were commanded to work before sin even entered the picture, it's like, oh wow, like I've had this all wrong. I've looked at work as a burden instead of an honor. Like I get to do this. I get to serve people. And looking at how even Jesus came and he served. He could have come in here with the title, come in here and destroyed. I mean, I was reading Haggai the other day, and the amount of times that he referred to himself as the Lord of hosts
yeah.
just tells us like he is all powerful, he is sovereign.
Mhm.
And so he could have come in here and like messed this whole world up, right? But
Yeah.
instead, he came as a servant, he came as a baby. And so that should be our cue that we put loving him and loving others above ourselves.
Yeah.
Because imagine if Jesus put himself before us. Man, would we be in trouble?
Yes. Whew, a lot.
Yes,
Man.
yes, yes. So, where do you think maturity kind of fits in? Because one of the verses that came to mind was you need milk, not solid food. And so this was in Hebrews. So Paul's telling them that believers are expected to grow, right? Like you come as you are, right? I think I hear that a lot. Like Jesus said to come as you are. Yeah, but you're not supposed to stay there, right? There should be some growth. And we see all throughout the New Testament where there's this idea of the vine and the branch, right? And so if you're not producing fruit, Jesus said that you're going to be cut off and thrown into the fire. So, how do we mature as believers outside of just having an active faith? Like, what does that look like to go from elementary teachings, like, okay, Jesus died on the cross, he rose again on the third day, to really understanding? And I think you kind of touched on it at the beginning, but can you go a little more into that?
Yeah, there's so much we can say here, so many ways we can go. I think, to put it simply, the mark of a baby or immature Christian, to really just evaluate your life, because I think everybody should do self evaluation every now and again, and to really look at your life and see, where am I at in this level of maturity? Ask yourself the question, are you mostly sitting and waiting for God to do for you? Because when I look at my kids, I have two bonus kids, okay? So I have a 5-year-old and a 9-year-old, then my children are 14 and 16. There are different levels of maturity here. My 5-year-old needs me to do more for her, and she expects me to serve her food when it's cooked. She expects me to lay her clothes out after she gets out of the shower. She expects me to brush her hair and braid her hair in the morning. Like, she's waiting for me to do these things for her. But
Hmm.
my 16-year-old, she catches the bus in the morning at 6 a.m. She wakes up at 5 a.m. on her own, sets her alarm, gets dressed, eats breakfast, fixes her hair, and knocks on my door every morning at 6 and says, I'm leaving. That's the mark of who is immature and who is mature. Are you wanting God to do it all for you? Or
Right.
are you able to take responsibility and accountability for your own walk and relationship? If you're mature, you don't need somebody to say, "Hey, I didn't see you at church this morning. Are you okay?" Like, you don't need that phone call. You don't need
Right.
It's not going to
Yeah.
offend you if somebody doesn't call you, because you realize My responsibility in my walk is my responsibility. You don't need somebody to say, hey, how much did you read in the Bible this week? I want to keep you accountable. You're keeping your own self accountable. It's a part of your daily life is to get into your word. You don't have to have somebody like checking you like that on every turn, you know. An immature believer for me is somebody who never takes time to hear the voice of God for themselves. The only time they hear the voice of God is on a Sunday morning in what the pastor had to say. And that is their voice for the week. Because once again, it goes back to they're expecting others to give them what they need. They're not at a level of maturity of, hey, I can fix my own breakfast for me. I can get in my word myself and get my daily bread on my own. I can lay hands on myself and pray myself through. I don't have to wait for Healing Line for the prayer group to pray for me. I can actually find a word for myself. I don't have to wait for the prophet or prophetess of the church to give me a word. So, I think it's a question we all need to ask ourselves is, and do it regularly. Am I waiting on other people to give me what I need spiritually and waiting for the Lord to do it all? Or am I taking responsibility in doing what I need to do to hear from God, to see what I need to see spiritually, to dive into my relationship? That is the mark of maturity, is not having to have somebody do it all for you. We've got Christians that are 20 years in that still don't know how to hear the voice of God, that still don't know how to read the word, that still don't know how to pray for themselves. If I had a 20-year-old daughter in my house that still didn't know how to cook, still didn't know how to get herself ready, still didn't know how to drive a car, there'd be something wrong. People would be like, what's wrong with your parenting? You haven't taught your child how to live life. And I think that church, we don't look at Christians that way. Like, what's going on? You should know how by now to walk with the Lord individually without somebody having to baby you through the whole process. But it's an everyday accountability and responsibility. And it's like learning a new language. You need somebody there at the beginning to really teach you, and you may have a couple of words and you're learning, but the more you do it, the more fluent you get, the more easily it is to speak that language. And it's the same way in Christianity. At first, you need people to hold your hand and walk you through, but the more you do it, the easier it gets, and it ought to get easier. And we see that even with babies learning how to walk, you know? So I think that's just what it boils down to, is just accountability and responsibility.
Right, and I think that there's a tension there, right? Because I think that, to your point, like, when you're a baby Christian, you do need some hand-holding, right? And this goes back to Paul telling us that, when you're immature, you need milk, and as you get older, then you can eat solid food. But, we also see in Romans 7:15-16, he says, "I do not understand what I do. What I want to do, I do not do." So there is this natural tension, right, of us wanting to do something, like our intention and our actions, right? And for me, like, I'm gonna tell myself,
Mm.
it's for me discipline in certain areas. Like, there's certain areas where I'm very disciplined. I have it together, and then in other areas, like, I almost get in my own head and I psych myself out. Like, so okay, we were doing the 75-day challenge, right? It was my
Mhm.
stupid idea, and so I'm not gonna name names, but somebody wanted to put some money on it, right? And so I was like, oh, I'm not losing this money, but I had like a few bad days in there, right? And so because I had a few bad days, I'm like an all or nothing type person, right? And that's a good and a bad thing, because in this situation, because I felt like I failed, I just threw in the towel. And I feel like sometimes, talking for myself, there was a season 2 where it's just like, "Oh, I forgot to pray, so just forget it." Like, God doesn't love me, type thing. So there's this tension between the
Yeah.
intentionality of wanting to get closer to God, but then the actions. And so then the actions, I was having a conversation with a friend about how there may be a reason for some things, right? So there may be a legitimate reason why someone behaves badly, right? Maybe they were abused or they went through something, but it's not an excuse, right? So almost like an ignorance of the law is not an excuse to break the law type thing. So that tension is real, but accountability is necessary. And I think that from my observation and experience, it kind of is multi-layered here, right? Like you have a personal responsibility. That is your ultimate responsibility. But then when you have people that aren't willing to hold you accountable or kind of enable it, then you can't call people up to that. So can you speak a little bit about like how do we help people and be honest with them about, that tension and where they are, without excusing the stagnation, but also without being judgmental and like condemning them, right? Because there's
Mhm.
conviction, but we don't want to condemn people, right?
Yeah. There's definitely a difference between conviction and condemnation. There's also, I think, once again, it goes back to the fact that we're not doing life with people the way we ought to. I think it all just kind of meshes together. You've got your own specific accountability and responsibility, but you ought to have some sort of accountability and that voice in your life with church. And if they're not doing anything more than a Sunday morning service, they're not really offering you a space for accountability, which is what the word calls discipleship. Also think this is such a huge topic that I think is hard to break down in a one question thing, because I also think it comes back to the fact that we have a lot of people in today's generation that say they want a pastor, but they really just want a preacher, because
Dang.
a preacher will tell them what they want to hear and what feels good. A pastor is going to be a person of accountability, to be that voice to hold you accountable and to disciple you. And so many more people I've found in this generation have lost the heart of discipleship. They want a pastor, of a preacher over a pastor. And when the first moment they get discipled, they get offended.
Yeah.
I think that it's easy to take somebody's correction as judgment. And I think that oftentimes we look at correction as you're judging me, you're condemning me. And I'm not saying that doesn't happen. There are lots of
Right.
churches where religious abuse is real. It's real.
Right.
And
Absolutely. Yep.
condemnation is just heavy. But I think there's more. um I'm not taking away from that side, but I think there's more sides of people just not wanting to be pastored and discipled and held accountable. So any little bit of correction is thrown off as you're judging me. You're supposed to be a Christian and you're condemning me. We have to be willing to be corrected and to hear where we're wrong. If we're going to be held accountable, we have to be held in the tension of being uncomfortable.
Yes. Yes.
So if you're going to be held accountable, you're not going to feel good when you're held accountable. And you can't put that off as, well, that's judgment. No, it's uncomfortability so that you can grow, because I can't grow you if I'm keeping you comfortable. And it's just like in a gym. You're not going to see your muscles grow if you don't hurt yourself, break those muscles down, get sore, you know, and I think we have a lot of people that want to stay feeling good. So if they're ever corrected, it doesn't feel good. So I'm just leaving the church and I'll do this on my own. And so it's
Right.
hard. It's a hard space for pastors to disciple people, because we know that's what we're supposed to do. But we've also got to have people understand that takes a space of tension to be able to be corrected and to hear a voice of accountability.
And it reminds me of like the refiner's fire, right?
Mhm.
And when I was going through my divorce, I really looked into that, like, because divorces suck. It is painful. It is terrible. Do not recommend it. 0 out of 10.
No.
But but what I will say is God's grace is sufficient. And the refiner's fire, you're burning out every impurity, every speck of dirt, anything that is not pure and fire is hot. Well, fire, or pastor's wife, Sister Martha, she always says, the same hot water can harden an egg or soften a potato. And so fire is powerful. And what they do is, as they're refining, they know that it's done, that it's purified when you can see your reflection in it.
Yep.
So we are going to go through fire, and it's going to be uncomfortable. It is going to be painful, but the
Yes.
goal isn't our comfortability. It is to see God in us, and he
Yes.
should be able to see his reflection in us. And I think that when we remove our happiness, our truth, our, like, all these little taglines people say, it's about God's holiness and his righteousness. God does
Yes.
not care about our happiness in that way. He cares about our joy. He cares about our salvation, us being with him. And I would hate to be that person that is offended because someone corrected me and then have to stand before the Lord at judgment and not only hear they were right, but I'm judging you for this now. Like, imagine
Yeah.
that. Like, I'd rather just rip off the band-aid. Tell me now before I get to that point. So can you walk us through what it has looked like for you in daily obedience to real discipleship? So um like we're kind of identifying the issues, right? And we're telling people to get into their word, discipleship, stuff like that. And God says, if you love me, you'll keep my commands, right? So he demonstrated how to obey through Jesus. So what does that look like? And how do you think that even us, like, I'm not a pastor, right? And I'm starting this off, but if I were to disciple someone, like, what does that look like, and how can I continue to grow in my walk with Christ? Because none of us have ever just arrived. Like, we're never going to get there. So what does that look like?
First of all, I think that the biggest lie that we can believe is because we haven't arrived, we have no voice to speak into people. And
Yeah.
I think that's where the enemy gets us stuck in never discipling people, is because, well, you're not perfect. So who are you to disciple somebody else?
Right. Yeah.
But I think that the bottom line is we're doing life together. Iron sharpens iron. And so I may not be perfect, but I can teach you what I know and vice versa. There's strengths that I have that you don't have, and there's strengths you have that I don't have. And there's areas I can speak into, and there's areas you can speak into, and we should sharpen each other. So, something that's been just so fun for me to watch is right now, my husband is in a season of working several jobs right now. And one of the jobs that he's at is a mechanic shop for semi trucks. And so he's
Okay.
at a place doing mechanic stuff on big trucks, and all these guys are there. You got mechanics, you got all kinds of people. And he said to the Lord, I know that my first purpose is ministry, which is all of ours, is to share the gospel with people. Doesn't matter where you're at, there's opportunity for discipleship everywhere you are. So I want to take the stigma from you can only disciple people if you're in full time ministry and in a church environment. You can disciple people anywhere you are. Jesus showed us that because he was discipling people on mountaintops, in boats,
Yeah.
on the sides of the
Yeah.
road, in houses, like anywhere you are, there's discipleship to be done. One of his biggest prayers is, Lord, use me to speak into people here at this mechanic shop and to just do ministry. And it's been so interesting because I think that is the first prayer we ought to pray every day is, God, send me one person. You can't
That's
disciple
good.
anyone if you don't have anyone to disciple. There is one person every day that you can come across that the Lord will give you, and it's a prayer that should be prayed every day. He goes into work and he prays that prayer, and it's so beautiful because there are conversations that open up. There's a guy in his work that is the roughest, like toughest guy there. And, dirty mouth, all the things, they're mechanics. And he said, a conversation came up. I don't know how it came about. And he just started speaking about his experience with the Lord in that area. And this guy ended up opening up out of nowhere because the Lord will send you one every day to disciple. And he said, yeah, well, I used to be a preacher. And my husband stopped and said, "What?"
Oh,
And he said, "Yeah, I was a pastor and I done messed my life up and went into all this stuff." And here's Anthony able to speak into this guy and disciple him in the fact that
yeah,
just because you messed up and walked away from a calling
there you go.
doesn't mean
Yes.
that you have to stay here. You can return. And it's little conversations like that. Every day, almost, he comes back with, "This truck driver came in and God gave me this word for this person. And God told me to go pray for this person." And discipleship comes from obedience. So it's not necessarily going to be a sit down with somebody telling them, "Here's the steps for Bible study. Here's the steps for
Yeah.
giving in your tithe and offering. Here's the steps for worship." Discipleship can come from everyday conversations where you aren't weird, you're real, and you simply just share life with somebody, and it opens up conversation for you to point them into a direction that puts them on the path of truth. That is discipleship. And I think sometimes we're like, "Okay, well, we're not discipling if we're not sitting down and doing a 5-step program of what this looks like." No, discipleship is conversation, everyday conversation with people. And hey, you can overcome that by this, and you give them a little word. Hey, there may be a season of unrest right now, but you can still have joy in a season of sorrow. And I want to share with you a time in my life where I was in the darkest place, but yet God gave me peace that surpassed understanding. And this is how I found it. That's discipleship. And
Yeah.
so I think we make discipleship hard when it should just be, it's doing life with, if we would come back to doing life with people,
Yeah.
conversation will open up organically. And we don't have to sit down and read a script about what we feel like needs to be taught. I can't tell you how many times I've sat down with people thinking conversation was going to go one way, and we ordered our coffee and had organic conversation, and a whole different direction catapulted from it. And it was a much deeper conversation than what the script was supposed to be about. It's about doing life with people and then allowing the Lord to use your experiences, your relationship, your history with him to speak into somebody's life. And that's what it boils down to. So we've got to stop making it hard, and we've got to start just being ourselves.
No, I absolutely love that. And I don't know if you've kind of experienced this lately, but every space that I go to, the topic almost comes up like, how do we take the gospel to the marketplace? And so we recently had a pastor come down and he taught them, and he did like a conference with us, and now we're going through his book. And it was so interesting to me, Alyssa. There's people asking, how do I share the gospel at work? And he was like, you just do your job. You do it well. You let your life be the testimony. And sometimes we try to force it, but our lives should shine so bright. And
Yes.
people are like, there's something different. There's
Mhm.
something different. Even a couple weeks ago, you and I, we lost one of our dear friends. And one of the things that they said at her service was, hey, if this is your first time at a church where we don't do funerals, but a celebration of life, this is how we do it because we know that we're going to see her again. And to see people get saved at a funeral
Yeah.
was just like, that's how you bring it to the marketplace. And
Mhm.
so that sometimes part of maturing is understanding to intercede on our own, to read our word on our own. If you have someone there doing it for you, you're never going to grow. Like going through my divorce, I had to learn how to knock on heaven's door myself. I had to pray myself through some very difficult days.
Huh.
And I'm grateful for it because now I don't have to wait for the pastor. I don't have to wait until Sunday. Hey, Jesus, you're my father. You care about me. You clothe the lilies. You feed the birds. You take care of the sparrows. So you're going to take care of me. So when I ask, when I seek, when I knock, the door is going to be opened. And you hear me. It may not be the answer that I like, but you hear me. And so I think that that's also part of discipleship is not being like daily and, up someone's butt type thing. I don't
Mhm.
know if I could say that on YouTube, but it is, being being an ear to listen to, praying with one another, encouraging one another, and first and foremost, making sure that your life reflects that because what do I look like telling you not to do something, I'm over here doing it, right? So I
Yeah.
think our lives are the biggest testimony and the biggest encourager in sharing your testimony, right? Like you went through that for a reason. That wasn't just for you. So don't there's no shame attached to that. So what's kind of your thoughts on that?
I think that the biggest, well, and this sounds so cliche, and we've heard it, the biggest Bible people can read is your life. And so, as much as you hate it and as much as you want to be in denial, people are watching how you handle life. You'd be surprised how many people are watching you, and you know, you got Facebook stalkers, you've got what we call monitoring spirits that literally will watch all of your stuff but never like it, never comment on it, never talk to you, never reach out to you. They're watching you though, boo boo. Like they are watching you. They're watching all your stuff. And I've had people come up to me and say, I know I don't ever check in, but I see all your stuff on social media. You know, people are watching. And even in your everyday life, your biggest reflection of being somebody who disciples people is giving them an example to follow. And it doesn't come with words a lot of times. It comes with action. And wow, that's somebody I can follow because I see how she's carrying herself in the midst of hell. I see how she's carrying herself in the midst of uncomfortable situations. And it didn't come from you sitting down and giving them a 12-step program. It came from you living life and showing them how to live life according to the kingdom. And they took notes on watching you live. When I was in Bible school, I was working at Walgreens in the photo department. And I worked with two women. One was a prostitute on the prostitute, a stripper on the weekends. The other was very open about the fact that she was having an affair with a married man and he had kids at home with his wife and everything. And both of them were very loud and proud. I'm going to be stripping at such and such club this weekend. You should come see me. And I'm going out with this married man this weekend. They were very loud and proud about it. But they both knew I was in Bible school. They both knew I was going to be a preacher and that I recorded music and that I was very much a Jesus Bible thumping lover. But I never went into work and told them, you know, your lifestyles are going to send you to hell. I never went into
Right.
work and said, you know what, you are trash. You're trash for doing these things. Don't you know you're more worth this and more worth than getting up there and selling your body? Don't you know that God has somebody for you and doesn't want to give you somebody else's husband? Like, I never did any of that. I literally just lived my life. I showed up to work and I did my job. I never judged them. I never talked bad to them. I asked them if they needed prayer. There were many times they came to me and they would be like, hey, could you pray for me? I've got a headache. Or, hey, could you pray for me? I'm having an emotional day. They always knew they could come to me because I never judged. I just loved. I loved them and I did my job. And I'll never forget after the second year and I was fixing to graduate and leave, I invited them to my house for a party. I was doing like a go away party. We were at the pool, we were ordering food and stuff. And they pulled me aside and they said, we need to talk to you. And I said, okay. They said, and they both started bawling and they said, we've been talking about you for the last year behind your back. And I said, okay. They were like, because we don't understand how a woman who's going to school for ministry can let us talk about stripping every weekend, being with married men, selling our bodies, doing all this stuff, and you never one time judged us. Like, you are not religious. And I looked at them and said, I'm relational. And they began to bawl and they said, we want to know the God that you serve. And before you leave, can you pray for us? Because we want to accept Jesus as our Savior. I did not have to preach one sermon to them. My life was the sermon. I simply offered them prayer, loved on them, spoke openly about my faith, and did my job. And at the end of the day, two women in sinful lives gave their heart to the Lord, not because I was discipling them with 12-step programs, but because I was discipling them with a lifestyle that spoke louder than words. And that
I
is
love that.
key. It's key.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, that was good. Like, I love that. I love that. And so I guess to kind of like bring it back, the purpose of this podcast is teaching people to live beyond Sunday, right? To put your faith into action. And so Titus 2:11-12 says, grace teaches us to say no and to live self-controlled and upright lives. And so grace isn't passive, it actively shapes how we live. So what would you say in closing, to kind of encourage the people, encourage those that are in different stages of their walk with God? Like
Mhm.
why is this important? And why do we need to do this now and not take our time in taking action in our faith?
I think, I have a different perspective on time just because being a two-time breast cancer survivor and then watching a late husband pass away at 38 years old unexpectedly, I think it's so easy to think you've got all the time in the world. And
Mhm.
it's so easy to get so lied to by the enemy that there's always tomorrow. There's always, I'll do it next Monday. I'll start next Monday. I'll start next Sunday. You don't know how or what or when is going to happen to you. And we've all been given the same 24 hours in the day. It really just boils down to what are you doing with your 24 hours? And
That's good.
I want to encourage you in the fact that it doesn't matter what level of maturity you're on. I have seen baby Christians right out the gate sharing more of their faith and who Jesus has been with them than somebody who sat in a church for 50 years on a pew.
Yeah.
I have seen baby Christians do more for the kingdom and more discipleship than people who have been in it their entire life. And it's because the more comfortable you get, the more you think, well, I've got tomorrow to do it.
Yeah.
But when you reflect every day on what God has done for you, it gives you urgency. I've got to tell everybody about this. Like, the
Yeah.
Lord's just done taken me through hell. He's healed my body. He's got me through divorce. He got me through death. He got me through depression. He took me out of suicidal thoughts. Like, I've got to tell everybody. I think it's if I could say every day, two things you ought to do in order to move forward in your faith and be active about it is recall every day what God has done.
Yes.
If you're not recalling it, and I would say do it first thing in the morning because it gives you a
Well,
focal point to thank God every day before you get started. I'm going to recall everything God has done and I'm going to thank Him for it. That will give you motivation to do the second thing. God, send me one person today, one
yes.
person to tell my story to, one person to speak into, one person to encourage. Those two things will keep you active in your faith walk. Recalling everything God's done and God, just send me one person. Just send me one person. Those two things keep you motivated in your walk. Otherwise, you're going to sit down and get boring and get complacent and get stagnant. So I would say to wrap it up, those two things are vital in constantly reminding yourself and constantly looking for somebody.
I love that. That is so good. Like, that's a whole other podcast we could do. I love that. I love it. Well, Alyssa, I appreciate you so much. You're someone that I love dearly, and thank you for taking the time. We will definitely have you back on. Um,
It's not about a moment, it's the way we live. Every breath, every step, something real to give. From the pews to the